In recent times, a robust and widespread discussion has emerged around the authenticity and sanctity of Sahih al-Bukhari. This is not a new controversy, nor is it limited to a few isolated voices. From the Arab world to the Urdu-speaking scholarly circles and beyond, this discourse is increasingly gaining traction. The purpose of this video is to critically analyze the issues surrounding Sahih al-Bukhari, raise valid questions, and promote transparency without discarding our scholarly tradition. My critique is not rooted in ignorance or malice, but in a sincere desire for intellectual honesty and reform. The growing critique has gained momentum globally. In the Arab world, academic and religious forums alike are revisiting the role and content of Sahih al-Bukhari. Debates on TV shows, YouTube channels, and academic institutions reflect that this is far from a fringe idea. It reflects the level of frustration and disillusionment felt by many when confronted with problematic hadith content. So why raise this issue now? There are three main concerns. The near-divine status of Sahih al-Bukhari. Sahih al-Bukhari is often treated as sacrosanct, practically on par with the Quran in the eyes of many Muslims. While people might verbally deny this equivalence, in practice, Bukhari is rarely, if ever, criticized. Even verses of the Quran are sometimes sidelined if they contradict hadith in Bukhari. Problematic hadith content. Some hadith within Sahih al-Bukhari are, quite frankly, blasphemous, irrational, or degrading. Examples include narrations where the Prophet supposedly tried to seduce a woman and was rejected, or that Moses, had a scrotal hernia and chased after a rock that stole his clothes. Other narrations suggest that the Prophet was affected by magic to the point he hallucinated having sexual relations with his wives. There are many much worse examples that cannot be even repeated in polite company. Such narrations are not just questionable, they are deeply offensive to many Muslims and undermine the dignity of our prophets. Transmission integrity. The entire text of Sahih al-Bukhari as we have it today is reliant on one main narrator, Muhammad ibn Yusuf al-Farabri. His manuscript was incomplete, and his students made alterations. Various manuscripts show discrepancies in chapter titles, chains of transmission, the isnads, and even hadith content. Later scholars like Sharafuddin al-Unini attempted to standardize the text, but even his manuscript is lost. All we have are copies made by others, some of whom were financially incentivized. Even those standardized editions were later found to contain hundreds of errors. We cannot afford to live in a bubble of censorship and denial in an age of information. Our faith is not so fragile that it cannot withstand scrutiny. Why is it that people can critique the Quran in its meaning and wisdom without causing an uproar, but Sahih al-Bukhari is untouchable? Why is reason and the Quran itself sidelined when a hadith in Bukhari contradicts them? Let's look at this person, Farabri, in detail. Is this person, Farabri, reliable? Bukhari had many students, according to Farabri himself. Khatib al-Baghdadi brings a chain quoting Farabri to say there were 70,000 people who transmitted Sahih al-Bukhari from Imam Bukhari, and then he goes on to say, but none of them are alive today except me. There were many others who transmitted, but none of their complete copies exist today, and we have already covered that in part 1. Like Ibrahim ibn Makal, but even his version of Sahih al-Bukhari has only 1,200 hadith out of the over 7,700 in the complete Bukhari. So now we are left with every copy traced back to Farabri. So as per hadith sciences, he has to be vouched for? But why did nobody declare him to be Sika, meaning reliable? This is the question, because he lives in a time where he is rubbing shoulders with some of the great scholars. He's obviously met Bukhari. He's in the time of people like Tirmidhi, Abu Dawood. He's in the time of Abu Hatim, Abu Zura. He's in the time of Nasai. He's in the time of all of these great scholars, and nobody who actually knows him ever vouched for him as reliable. Yes, there have been claims that he has been reliable by many scholars. The question is, when they say he is reliable, who has vouched for him? The earliest that they're going with are people that, first of all, never ever met him, came over 100 years after him. And then secondly, it's very suspect that they even said this because it's not in their books. So it's highly suspect. So to bridge this gaping chasm, the scholars come up with the excuse that just because people transmitted from him, that should make him reliable. Because he had at least one scholar of hadith called al-Hafiz ibn Sakan, who transmits from him. Therefore, it should be fine. But you see, even Ibn Sakan, who takes Sahih al-Bukhari from Farabri, even he doesn't declare him to be reliable, but the scholars insist that this should make him reliable. Ibn Sakan, by the way, is known for his extreme lenient and relaxed attitude towards hadith and declares people sikha or reliable. And even he hasn't declared Farabri sikha. Even the great scholar Khatib al-Baghdadi said, if a scholar transmits from somebody, that does not mean they are declaring them reliable. And that anybody who believes that just because someone transmitted from someone makes him reliable is absolutely false and baseless. Which should be the case because then everybody would be reliable when it comes to hadith and history. And now we come to an even bigger problem than just Farabri himself. We've established that no one vouched for him as reliable, and those who did or were made to seem so also have issues. But even bigger issue is that we don't even have Farabri's own copy of Bukhari, and that's where the real problems start to surface. Farabri's student, Abu Ishaq al-Mustamli, says, I copied from Farabri's copy of Sahih al-Bukhari, and I saw many things that were still incomplete in his copy. He had chapter headings which were empty, they had no hadith in them, some hadith with no chapter heading, and he says, so we started to move them around. And what proves this to be true is, as said by Abu al-Walid al-Baji in Fath al-Bari by Ibn Hajar, that Mustamli's copy, Saraksi's copy, Kushmahin's copy, and Marwazi's copies are all different. So it shows, despite them taking from one book, they all different. But how? And they are not minor differences or mix-ups. Disagreement with names and actual names in the Isnad are missing as well. So Farabri's students did as each of them pleased with his incomplete copy of Bukhari. Then the Mamluk Sultan of Egypt and Syria commissions al-Unini to standardize the Bukhari. So he does his grand makeover project with massive monetary backing from the Sultan to get it right. Unini makes huge amendments, and he sits with the grammarian Ibn Malik, and they then make amendments to the Arabic as well. The question is, why were there such big errors even in the Arabic itself in the first place? And then, al-Unini's grand copy also goes missing, and we only have copies from his copy, which then later on are redone again by under the commissioning of Sultan Abdulhamid II of the Ottoman Empire, and even that has several mistakes in it. The point is, can the scholars answer all these things? And the answer is they can't. Let's look at that claim once again, shall we? The claim is that this is the most authentic book on earth for Muslims after the Quran. Well, after having read through all of that, keeping in mind we haven't even touched upon the problem with Imam Bukhari himself, and he was well known for doing tadlis among many other things, it would be absolutely absurd to even think of Bukhari as the most authentic book. Another question, and this might be slightly conspiratorial, that comes to mind is having gone through so many hands and before so many eyes, over so many centuries, how come so many hadiths still being published till this day that make no sense and are just a jumble of words, hadith that have grammatical errors, to hadith that go against the Quran, to hadith that are downright insulting to Allah, Deen, and the prophets? How come these hadiths haven't been omitted or filtered out in all this time and purposely kept in? The time for blind reverence is over. The time for honest conversation has begun. In recent times, a robust and widespread discussion has emerged around the authenticity and sanctity of Sahih al-Bukhari. This is not a new controversy, nor is it limited to a few isolated voices. From the Arab world to the Urdu-speaking scholarly circles and beyond, this discourse is increasingly gaining traction. The purpose of this video is to critically analyze the issues surrounding Sahih al-Bukhari, raise valid questions, and promote transparency without discarding our scholarly tradition. My critique is not rooted in ignorance or malice, but in a sincere desire for intellectual honesty and reform. The growing critique has gained momentum globally. In the Arab world, academic and religious forums alike are revisiting the role and content of Sahih al-Bukhari. Debates on TV shows, YouTube channels, and academic institutions reflect that this is far from a fringe idea. It reflects the level of frustration and disillusionment felt by many when confronted with problematic hadith content. So why raise this issue now? There are three main concerns. The near divine status of Sahih al-Bukhari.